The wind was the first messenger. It rose before the sun, winding like a silent mourner through the salt-choked cliffs above the Dead Sea. It carried no warmth, only the thin scent of scorched earth, old blood, and dust, the last whispers of 1,000 silent screams lost to stone. And in that hour before light, Masada stood alone, a broken crown of rock and silence, raised high against a sky that refused to soften. The fortress did not stir. Its walls, once adorned by a king who dreamed of Rome from a desert throne, now wept with cracks. Limestone flaked beneath the stars. Black crows circled, then vanished into the abyss below. Somewhere behind the wind's chant, a child coughed, dry and sharp, a sound too small to break the spell, too human to ignore. Below the cliff's edge, the enemy had come. Rome, merciless, patient, vast, had unfurled its red banners like a wound across the sand. Their tents multiplied by the night, clustering like locusts. Fires crackled in trenches dug with brutal precision. And in the silence between their drums, the steady scrape of stone against stone, Roman engineers dragging earth and timber up from the valley floor, carving their siege ramp one breathless hour at a time. It would take them 16 days. Not the years once etched in legend, not the long winter of suffering passed from one mouth to another. 16 days. Long enough to pray. Short enough to feel betrayed by hope. Within Masada's walls, faith was all they had left. Eleazar ben Yair stood alone by the edge of the northern tower, his cloak stiff with dew, his fingers red from the cold stone ledge. He watched the Roman lines ripple outward like veins from a bleeding heart. His breath steamed in the air as he whispered a verse. Not for deliverance, but for remembrance. They have surrounded me like bees. They are quenched like a fire of thorns. Behind him, the defenders stirred. Some were Sicarii, zealots and fighters who had fled Jerusalem's fall with blood still fresh on their sandals. Others were families, wives who still ground barley in silence, boys who traced old psalms with cracked fingers in the dust, old men who spoke little but wept often. They had come here to survive. Now they waited to die. They were not soldiers in the Roman sense. They did not wear iron greaves or carry formation shields. Their armor was belief, their blades were few and rusted, but they had fire and memory and rage. Each morning the wind brought ash, not always visible, but they smelled it in their water, tasted it in their bread. The Romans burned scrub from the ravines to feed their siege engines, turned cedar and cypress into weapons, and with each beam placed, with each stone dragged, the mountain grew smaller. Time pressed closer. Masada had been Herod's dream, a desert palace in the sky, carved for kings, not martyrs. Its cisterns had once overflowed with water channeled from miles away. Its storerooms, vast as temples, had held spices, wine, grain. Now those same storerooms held fear, packed tightly beside barley sacks and beeswax candles. They counted their food in handfuls, measured water by the drip. Salt crusted their lips. Hope grew thinner than parchment. Still, Eleazar walked among them each dusk, his sandals wrapped in cloth to quiet his steps. He touched shoulders, murmured prayers, tightened loose ropes around doorposts. He did not speak of escape. He did not promise miracles. He spoke instead of ancestors, of Moses, of rebellion, of sacrifice that sanctifies the soil. They will not break the walls, he once said, holding up a clay shard scorched at its edges. The walls are already broken. What matters now is what we carry across the threshold. On the 15th day, a raven landed beside the main gate. It tilted its head, pecked once at the dust, and flew. Some called it a sign. Others said nothing at all. That night, a woman named Daphne sang to her daughter in the dark. The song was old, older than Rome, older than Herod. A lullaby meant to guard dreams from demons. But there were no dreams left in Masada. Only choices. By morning, the ramp was complete. The Romans waited until the sun was highest. Then silence. No trumpet, no roar, just the grinding push of a siege tower, massive and dark, lumbering forward like some ancient beast. Eleazar watched. He did not blink. He turned slowly and walked the narrow stone corridors to the synagogue. The elders were already there. The room was cold. No fire was lit. One by one they stood, not as generals, not as rulers, but as witnesses. And then as judges. The decision was not made with joy. It was not easy, but it was shared. Death would come, but not by Roman hand. They would deny the empire its spectacle. They would not be paraded, shackled, sold. Their bodies would not warm the gladiator sands. Their children would not cry in foreign tongues. One by one, they wrote their names on potsherds, casting lots not for survival, but for the final act. 10 would be chosen. They would move swiftly, silently, faithfully. Eliezer's voice did not waver as he spoke the ritual. The final words were not of despair, but of transcendence. Let us die in freedom and leave this world as men, not slaves. That night, torches were extinguished. The fires on the Roman side burned bright, celebration anticipated. But inside Masada, silence deeper than death. When the Romans breached the gates at dawn, they found no resistance. Only the smell of oil and ash, only stillness. Bodies lay cradled in shadow. Mothers beside daughters, husbands beside wives. The 10 chosen men, still, blades beside them, names etched in clay. A ritual of endings, a sanctuary of smoke. In one chamber, a loaf of bread still rested on a stone table, untouched, as if left for God. The Roman commander did not speak. Even he, the architect of siege, knew the cost of this kind of victory. He ordered no celebration, no trumpet, no report, just silence. Masada fell, but its story did not. Its ashes scattered to wind and time, to scroll and myth, to questions no empire could bury. The mountain still stands, weathered, barren, vast, a monument not to defeat, but to choice. And as the last crow circles above its broken ramparts, the question still echoes in the wind. What is worth dying for when all else is gone? And in that wind, a door creaks open. Toward the next story, toward another hill, another fire, another people who will stand, not because they can win, but because they refuse to kneel. Night falls not like a curtain, but like a breath held too long. The Mesa of Masada dims beneath a bruised sky, and all color bleeds from stone and flesh alike. In the slow hush between torchlight and starlight, a woman kneels near the cistern wall, her shawl pulled tightly over graying hair. Her fingers trace a familiar groove in the stone, a mark worn by generations drawing washing wounds, sharpening blades. Her eyes are hollow, her breath shallow. She does not cry. There are no tears left to weep. Above her, wind hums through the scorched wooden rafters of the Western Palace, where flames once danced to the music of royal feasts. Now, silence reigns. Candlelight flickers low, barely warming the cold mosaic floors where Herod once walked, perfumed and praised. The desert has taken back what men built with pride. Even grandeur cannot resist hunger, fear, and time. Eliezer ben Yair stands near the crumbled edge of a once glorious courtyard, wrapped in a coarse wool robe that scratches at the neck and smells faintly of smoke. He is still young, but war has furrowed his brow and thinned his voice to gravel. His eyes sweep over his people. The broken, the bound, the faithful. They do not bow when they see him. They nod as if to say, "We are still here." That is enough. The siege tightens. Below the Mesa, Rome prepares. Tents bloom like poppies on bloodless sand. Torches burn through the night. A legion without mercy builds with terrifying calm, dragging limestone and mud brick up the ramp, plank by plank, stone by stone. Their movements are relentless, almost reverent, as if this act of conquest has become liturgy. The narrator's voice descends into the breathless dread of it. 6,000 men, 16 days. An empire's might assembled not in years of attrition, but in weeks of flawless execution. The desert groans under their weight. The Sicarii watch in silence, leaning from battlements, their sandals worn thin. They no longer throw insults, no longer waste arrows. The futility has grown thick, like the ash that settles each morning on their food stores, on the palms of praying hands. A child drops a barley cake into the dust. Her mother picks it up, brushes it clean, breaks it in two. She places one half on a stone shelf in the synagogue, beneath a faded verse. "The Lord is my refuge and my fortress." The rest she tucks in cloth, for later, if later comes. In the upper chambers, decisions are whispered, not with swords but with scripture, not with rage but with ritual. They recall Ein Gedi, raided years ago for its balsam groves. The sweet oil had burned beneath their torches, its scent twisting with guilt and necessity. It was a moment of power, a seizure of sustenance. But now that memory returns bitter, curling into their nostrils with the smoke of their own dwindling lamps. The wind shifts again. A raven calls once from the sky, a single note that falls like a nail into wood. Eliezer gathers the elders in a room that was once tiled in color. Now, most hues are lost to sun and silence. Only the blues remain, sharp, stubborn, defiant. They sit on woven mats, their knees cracked, hands trembling as they sip boiled herbs from earthen cups. Each knows the time is near. Each sees the ramp's shadow creeping higher on the Mesa wall. The Romans will breach by morning. They will not wait another day. A vote is taken, not with raised voices or clenched fists, but with stillness. One by one, they bow their heads. Their breath is agreement. Their silence, consent. They will die, but not in surrender. The conversation shifts, not to strategy, but to ritual. How to prepare, how to instruct the mothers, how to shield the children from pain, how to keep the Romans from touching even a single living soul within these sacred stones. Some will call it murder, others, martyrdom. But to those gathered here, it is freedom. Eleazar steps outside. The moonlight etches his shadow across the courtyard where barley sacks lean against the walls. He passes a young boy sitting alone, eyes wide, holding a carved wooden lamb. Eleazar crouches. "Do you know the story of the first Passover?" he asks, voice barely above a whisper. The boy nods. His grip tightens on the lamb. "We marked the doors," Eleazar continues, "so that death would pass over." The boy stares into the dark. "And tonight?" he asks. Eleazar's eyes gleam with salt. "Tonight, we mark ourselves." Torches are lowered, doors closed, not in panic, in reverence. One family sings quietly. Another recites verses in the dim light of a single clay lamp. A man sharpens a blade, not for war, but for what comes after war, the ritual beyond resistance. And high above the rest, Eleazar enters the chamber of lots. He lifts the small clay shards, each inscribed with a name, 10 in total, the final executors of a pact made under God and fire. He draws them slowly, placing them in a bowl lined with goat hair. The names are sacred, the act unthinkable. But still, his hand does not shake. Outside, the stars begin to fade. Dawn is approaching. From the Roman lines, horns sound. The tower creaks forward. Shields are raised. Orders given. But Masada remains still. No defenders man the wall. No arrows fly. Only the wind responds, whispering between the stones, rattling doors already sealed from within. As the siege engine lurches toward the final ascent, a woman in the inner courtyard lays a veil over her daughter's eyes. Her hands tremble, but her voice is calm. "Sleep," she whispers, though she knows the girl will not. In a room above, one of the 10 kneels over the 9th. The blade falls. A prayer escapes. The ritual has begun. And as the first Roman boot crosses the threshold of the breached wall, a single dove, startled by the clash of metal and stone, erupts from the rafters, flying skyward into the smoke-stained dawn. They will find no spoils here. No slaves, no prisoners. Only the echo of a people who chose fire over chains. Only a sanctuary turned furnace. By belief, by dread, by defiance, too great to kneel. And so the chapter closes, with doors burned shut. With silence echoing louder than any war cry. And somewhere beneath the dust, a broken key rests on stone, a door unopened, a question unspoken. What comes after fire? What rises from ash? That, too, waits beyond the next shadow. It began with the sound of a blade across stone, a slow, rasping drag, not of war, but of preparation. A man hunched by firelight, sharpening the same iron he once used for olives and goats, now tempered for something sacred. His face is hollow, his breath shallow. Behind him, a clay lamp flickers, throwing long shadows that dance across the walls like spirits awaiting their final blessing. The air in Masada is no longer still. It tastes of something final. Burnt cedar, cooling ash, and the stale breath of people who have stopped hoping for sunrise. The walls sweat at dawn. The stone breathes frost. Yet within that cold fortress beats a slow, steady fire. This is not a story of siege in the way history prefers to tell it, with maps and maneuvers, dates and decrees. This is a story of people who chose their ending, not because they were brave, but because they had nothing left to surrender. The wind that rushes down from the cliffs each morning is not free. It whistles through broken archways and over the last preserved mosaics of Herod's dream. His pleasure palace, now stripped of opulence, is scaffolded with silence. Its frescoes have faded to smudges. Its cisterns echo with absence. And still, people dwell in the ruins. They sing softly at dusk, hymns that crack like branches under snow. A woman stirs lentils in a pot that barely simmers. A boy listens for his father's steps. A man counts the last of the barley grains, not with fear, but with ritual care, placing them in rows like bones prepared for burial. Eleazar ben Yair moves through this dying place like a priest of ash. His voice does not rise, it gathers. He knows they are nearing the end, not because of prophecy or signs, but because of the smell. It has changed. It no longer speaks of battle. It speaks of burning, Below them, the Romans build. They do not shout, they do not charge, they assemble with the quiet confidence of empire. The siege ramp rises faster than despair can deepen. Recent discoveries say it took mere weeks, but for those above it feels both sudden and endless, a constant scraping at the sky. Rome climbs, one fistful of earth at a time. No relief will come. Jerusalem has fallen, the temples have burned, the sacred veil has torn. Here on this isolated mesa, surrounded by salt and memory, faith becomes flame. In the inner chambers, they have begun to speak of the end, not in madness, but in clarity. They remember the stories of Saul, who fell on his sword rather than be captured, of Samson, who pulled down the temple to bury his captors, of Daniel, who would not bow even in exile. Their end will not be accidental, it will be chosen. One man writes scripture in charcoal on a wall near the western storehouse. His fingers are blistered, but his lines remain steady. Better to die than to see the children of Israel defiled. And yet, even now, love does not vanish. A mother plaits her daughter's hair. She does not tell her what is coming, but her hands are gentle, her voice tender as she hums an old lullaby from the valley orchards near Ein Gedi. It speaks of spring, of dates thick with honey, of shadows that pass but never stay. In another room, a group of men sit in a circle. 10 shards of pottery lie between them, each etched with a name. They have agreed. When the time comes, they will act, quickly, with mercy, and with silence. Eliezer watches them from the doorway, his eyes hollowed by hunger and prayer. His voice when it comes is soft. We do not die in despair. We die in defiance, and in doing so, we remain. No one speaks after that. The lamps are extinguished early that night, one by one. The mesa darkens like a tomb sealed in ritual, yet the stars above burn clear, as if heaven refuses to look away. Down below, the Roman commander stands at the edge of the completed ramp, his armor faintly glowing in torchlight. He does not smile. He does not celebrate. He merely waits. Tomorrow, the gates will open, and the final act will begin. But inside Masada, time has already shifted. A door is barred with quiet reverence. A blade is kissed before it's drawn. A prayer is whispered, not for salvation, but for swiftness. There are no screams, only breath, only the careful rhythm of hands releasing control. And then, just before dawn, a torch is lit once more. It is not for sight, but for memory. A single flame to bear witness before being snuffed by the morning wind. Its light falls on a young boy's sandal, still tied neatly, on a loaf of bread, untouched, on a woman's veil, folded as if for travel. The Romans breach. They move slowly at first, expecting resistance, traps, cries, but there is none. They enter the silent halls like trespassers in a sanctuary. Even the wind dares not speak now. They find the bodies gathered, not sprawled in chaos, but arranged in a final, holy order. Arms around children, faces turned toward the east. The 10 who bore the blades lie furthest from the rest, alone, their task complete, their names lost save for the pottery shards, and among the ashes they find the scrolls, not torn, not burned, preserved, as if even death could not silence the words. Masada has fallen, but no chains were fastened, no victory songs sung. Rome claimed a fortress, but it never conquered the will. And as the wind returns to its morning haunt, brushing sand over footprints, erasing the presence of the living, a final question rises in its breath. What remains of us when we choose the flame? A raven circles once, then vanishes into the desert sky. And behind it, the sun rises, not as a triumph, but as a requiem. It is night again, and the sky is cracked with stars. Far below the silence, the Dead Sea glows faintly with the moon's reflection, thick as oil, unmoving, a mirror for the dead. And high above, suspended between sand and starlight, Masada breathes like a wounded thing, not yet gone, but no longer whole. There is no more wind tonight, only the whisper of torch smoke curling from unseen hands, only the rustle of cloaks drawn tighter, of bare feet shuffling across the chilled mosaic floors that once warmed the souls of kings. In the far corridor of the lower palace, a mother ties a linen sash around her child's waist, then kisses his forehead, not with panic, but with something quieter, a farewell long rehearsed. The fortress has become a tomb of memory. Its cisterns, once brimming with water drawn by clever hands from desert gullies, now echo with footsteps and quiet prayers. The steps are worn smooth by ritual, not retreat. They descend deeper into the shadow of things once kept hidden, the inner vaults, the quiet rooms of bread and silence. This is not panic. This is preparation. Outside the walls, the Romans are ready. Their siege ramp, impossibly steep and mathematically cruel, now kisses the base of the western gate. Built not with fire, but with patience, it carries in its weight all the certainty of empire. It was not merely constructed, it was summoned, carried forward by the hands of 6,000 men in 16 days beneath desert sun and the ghost of rebellion. And now, it waits. Masada does not. Eleazar ben Yair walks beneath the lintels marked with bloodless thresholds. His fingers brush the cold stone as he passes, not in reverence, but in reckoning. These are not battlements now. They are memories turned to mortar. Every block set by Herod now bears witness to a different king, one who rules nothing but time. In the southern storeroom, the last of the figs are passed hand to hand. Salted goat meat is divided among 6. A young woman writes verses on palm bark with a sharpened bone. Her letters are uneven, her hand trembling, not from fear, but from hunger. The ink is balsam oil mixed with soot, the same balsam they once plundered from Ein Gedi, trading perfume for survival. The sweetness of it still clings to their fingers, even as the scent has long vanished. They remember the raids, the cracked amphorae, the Roman merchants hung by ropes, the olive groves torched to ash. It is all part of this final debt, the arithmetic of vengeance, the long addition of loss. They are not saints, they are not blameless, but they are resolved. In the courtyard, the final oil lamps are lit, not for warmth, but for remembrance. Their light flickers over the remnants of Herod's court, tiled floors cracked with age, pillars missing their crowns, bronze fittings greened with age, and above all, the emptiness of what could have been. Masada was never meant for this. It was a palace, a promise, a retreat for those who feared collapse, but not the cost of decadence. Herod built it not to fight, but to flee, a fortress for cowards draped in gold. But what he built to escape Rome now becomes the last altar of resistance. The irony is carved into every wall. A girl stands alone at the highest point, watching the fires below. The Roman camps are still, their lines perfect, their banners motionless. She listens, not for voices, but for her own heart. It beats slow, heavy, ready. A raven calls once from a broken archway, then flutters into the night. She turns, not startled, but aware. There are signs in every wing beat now, in every gust, in every silence that follows. Inside, Eleazar speaks to the elders. His voice is measured, dust-filled, tired, but it holds. We have asked for nothing and received it, so now we must answer. No one argues. There is no fire in their eyes, only reflection. Like the Dead Sea below, they shine without movement, still, wide, surrendered to the inevitable. They do not speak of Rome anymore, not of the emperor, nor of his gods. The empire has become the silence outside the walls, vast, cold, and without meaning. But within, meaning still burns. Children are gathered near the synagogue, where the Torah once rested in ceremonial cloth. They sit quietly, heads resting on their mothers' laps. No one speaks. The elders hum a tune older than stone, a melody remembered from temple steps and desert processions. It is not for comfort. It is for completion. One man wraps a broken lyre in wool and places it beneath the floorboards. Another buries a scroll beneath the courtyard, near the foot of the olive press. They do not expect these things to be found, but they need them to rest. Later, Eleazar walks the full length of the fortress, from gate to gate. He leaves no word unspoken, no name unblessed. His feet trace the same path the Romans will walk by morning, but he walks it now in silence, before it is stained with conquest. Above, the stars begin to fade, and with them, the last firelight inside Masada. In a chamber below the eastern wall, the 10 men chosen by lot prepare the final act. Their hands are steady. They touch shoulders. They speak not of duty, but of peace. Theirs will be the final breaths, the last blades. They will pass into history unnamed, but not forgotten. When the sun finally crests the Moab hills, its light falls across the ramp. Dust rises, armor gleams, the Romans advance, but Masada does not answer, not with arrows, not with cries, not with pleas, only with the echo of a door left open, swinging gently in the wind. A Roman soldier crosses the threshold. His footstep echoes through the empty halls. He pauses, sword drawn, uncertain, and then a breath, faint, fading. The final sound in a place emptied by its own hand. They find the bodies in rows, together, not scattered, not slaughtered, but placed. And above them, on the wall, a single verse etched in soot. Our hands are empty, but our spirits remain. And in that moment, even Rome does not speak. The rope swayed in the wind. It hung like a question from the edge of the northern wall, a frayed lifeline, knotted with the weight of too many choices. At dawn, it stirred with the desert's breath, the knots twisting gently like fingers in prayer or nooses awaiting their names. It had once lifted water jars, baskets of dates, sacks of barley ground into flour. Now it hung in silence, useless, waiting. Below, the Roman camp stretched into the sea of dust, rigid, orderly, permanent. Banners motionless in the windless heat, their machines were ready, the ramp complete. And inside Masada, the defenders knew. This was the last day. There would be no second sun. The fortress no longer felt like a sanctuary. The walls had grown heavy, not with stone, but with memory. Cracked floors remembered sandals that no longer walked them. Doorframes still bore the oil-smudged fingerprints of men now gone into shadow. Every chamber felt like a tomb already spoken for, and yet life still moved within. In a quiet alcove, a mother braided her daughter's hair with trembling hands. Her fingers worked carefully, pulling strands into loops as if time could be woven tighter. Beside them, the father carved a final psalm into soft limestone, his thumb streaked with soot, the tip of his blade dulled to silence. The words were slow, each letter a resistance, a remembrance, a refusal to be erased. They were not preparing for war. They were preparing for memory. Eleazar ben Yair stood before the last assembly of elders in the synagogue's hollowed heart. No scrolls were left on the altar, only clay lamps and silence. The smoke from their wicks curled like black vines into the domed ceiling, fading against stone that had borne every secret of the rebellion. His voice did not shake. They will take our bones, but not our will. They will speak of victory, but not of justice. We choose what remains. And in the quiet that followed, heads bowed, not from defeat, but from duty. The 10 were chosen, their names drawn once again, the clay shards passed from hand to hand like sacred relics. They would end it, all of it, swiftly, without hesitation, without cruelty, not for glory, for grace. And so the preparations began. The children were led to the lower cisterns, where the air was cool and thick with damp earth. They were given wine laced with poppy resin. They would sleep, deeply, without fear, without pain. The mothers stayed with them. They did not cry. There was no more room for tears, only time, and even that was running thin. Above them, the Roman siege tower creaked forward. Slowly, inexorably, one breath closer to the gate, the commander watched from afar, expression blank beneath his polished helm. He had waited weeks for this, and he would enter not as a soldier, but as history's witness. Inside, the Sicarii moved like shadows through the fortress. One placed a lamp on the highest tower and lit it, not to signal, but to sanctify. Another laid his blade across a stone threshold and kissed its hilt. Another sang beneath his breath, the melody barely audible over the shifting wind. The rope still swayed. By dusk, the silence inside was total. No footsteps, no voices, only the slow, steady drip of water from a cracked amphora and the occasional creak of wood cooling in the evening air. In one final act, Eleazar climbed the narrow steps to the watchtower and looked out one last time. The Dead Sea gleamed below, motionless and thick, a mirror that refused to ripple, as if the world itself held its breath. He knelt, not in submission, in gratitude. Then he rose and walked back down into the dark. In the final hour, the 10 did what they had sworn. One by one, they passed through the chambers, offering peace where Rome would bring chains. The poppy worked quickly, the blades quicker, and when the time came, only one man remained. He looked upon the faces of his kin, not as victims, but as vows fulfilled, and he fell upon his sword. When the Romans entered at dawn, the smell struck them first, oil, ash, and something older, something sacred. There were no defenders, no captives, only stillness. The storerooms were full, barley, wine, dried fruits, untouched, as if to say, this was not famine, this was faith. In the synagogue, a scroll lay open on a stone bench, its last verse half written, the ink still wet. Outside, on the wind-worn tower, the rope still hung, its knots unmoved, its final purpose fulfilled. No one touched it, not even the conquerors. And in that moment, with the desert holding its breath and the fortress emptied not by war but by will, even the Romans could not call it a victory. They had broken the walls. But the spirit they found untouched. Masada did not fall, it chose. And the rope, swaying gently in the golden morning light, bore silent witness to a people who would rather vanish than kneel. A soft twilight clung to the Mesa. That strange hour when the sun forgets itself and everything turns to shadow. Long, gold-flecked dust moved over Masada like breath over a dying mouth. The wind no longer howled, it sighed gently like a mourner late to the funeral, unsure whether to knock or kneel. The walls still stood, blackened by smoke, hollowed by silence, but standing. The Roman boots made no echo as they climbed, no drum, no horn. Only the heavy scrape of sand against leather, stone against steel. The ramp, their monstrous work of geometry and fire, was now behind them. The final ascent had been made. But as they stepped through the breached gate, they entered not a battlefield, but a graveyard of choice. The smell met them first. Not of rot, not of decay, but of smoke, oil, and something strangely sweet, balsam oil, thick in the air, once looted from Ein Gedi, now burned in sacrament. It clung to the walls, seeped from cloth, soaked into the stones, as if the very air had inhaled the final ritual and refused to exhale. They found no resistance, only bodies, arranged not in terror, but in care, mothers holding children, elders at rest with closed eyes and folded hands, their garments clean, their limbs unbroken, a stillness too deep to be called death. This was not conquest, this was decision. The Roman commander paused on the threshold of Herod's ruined chamber. His shadow stretched long across the mosaic floor, where once gods had danced in tiles of blue and gold. Now, only ash lay thick in the cracks. And above him, the ceiling had collapsed, as if the sky itself had leaned too heavily on sorrow. He did not speak. No order could make sense of what he saw. The fortress had prepared itself, every storeroom still full, barley stacked high, water untouched, wine sealed with wax, the supplies of a settlement unstarved, unbroken, untouched by siege. They had not waited to be found. They had left a message written in absence. Further in, he passed through the chambers where the 10 had fallen, the final men who bore the task of death itself, their swords still beside them, the clay shards bearing their names scattered in a broken circle. There was no blood, only stillness, only resolve carved into the hollow of the earth. In the synagogue, a scroll lay open to the Book of Lamentations. A verse hung in the air, unfinished. For these things I weep, my eye runs down with water. The ink was smudged, perhaps by tears, perhaps by time. He stepped back, unsure if he had trespassed. There was a sense that even now, even with the walls breached, the gates broken, the torches lit, the place was not his. It belonged to something else. A belief, a grief, a silence that would outlive empire. Elsewhere, a soldier removed his helmet, not in salute, but in awe. He had never seen Defiance shaped like this. Outside, the wind stirred again. It moved gently over the rampart, brushing against the rope that still hung from the tower edge, a symbol of what had once lifted hope, now swaying without purpose, but not without meaning. The rope held knots, not from climbing, but from counting. Each one a vow, a prayer, a turning point. It would be left untouched. The Romans knew better than to sever what they could not understand. At the edge of the cliff, the commander approached a small stone ledge. There, carved in haste but with precision, were 3 words in Hebrew, faded but legible. Zakar et ha'emet, remember the truth. No monument stood beside it, no guards, no altar, just wind and salt and stone. The sun continued to rise, but Masada cast a long shadow down the ramp across the desert floor, stretching beyond the reach of Roman swords. In Jerusalem, they would one day raise archways in celebration of this siege. In Rome, they would speak of victory, of obedience reclaimed. But Masada would tell another story. It would not shout. It would whisper. To those who would listen, to the pilgrims, the wanderers, the rebels, the haunted, it would offer its silence as a kind of map, not toward escape, but toward understanding. As the last Roman soldiers departed, the wind stirred once more, catching the edges of cloaks and stirring the dust into soft spirals. And in that moment, just before the sun crested the far hills, a dove rose from the broken watchtower and vanished into the haze. Not as symbol, but as witness. And Masada exhaled. The siege was over. But the memory had just begun.